So in an environment that demands efficiency, Japanese team will excel. If it's clear what needs to be done and who should do what, you'll be amazed what people can do. But obviously the world is anything but predictable. It demands speed, sometimes even at the expense of quality.
Welcome to the Agile Digital Transformation Podcast, where we explore different aspects of digital transformation and digital experience with your host, Tim Butera, Content and Community Manager at AgileDrop.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Our guest today is Younes Hairej, founder and CEO of Aokumo. They're a technology company based in Tokyo, Japan, which is focused on helping organizations drive innovation and transformation through modern technologies and modern approaches. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the role of culture for effective digital transformation, and we'll be drawing from Younes's unique experience of leading IT teams for different Japanese companies. Welcome, Younes. It's great having you here. Anything you'd like to add to the intro, or should we just proceed with our questions?
Thanks, Tim, for having me here. I think we can just dive into it.
Okay, so maybe let's start with something basic. Maybe can you tell me why would you say the role of culture is so important for effective transformation? And has this always been the case, or has it maybe become more pronounced, more prominent during the COVID crisis?
Okay, first, it's a great question. So just to put some context, I've been in Japan for about 20 plus years. So I'll share from my experience, observations, failures, and lesson learned. So experiences such as being the only foreigner in the training program at Sony, for example. Back then it was Sony Ericsson after graduation. Experience being part of the of culturally diverse teams and experience leading teams, both Japanese and mixed culturally diverse. So in the context of digital transformation, there's a lot of emphasis on the first part, digital, which is absolutely important. So to be digital, organizations need to put technology at the core, but only when you have the right environment. So culture is really key to the second part of the digital transformation, which is transformation. So transformation, as we know, means change, and sometimes dramatic change. So done by people, and it impacts people. In fact, it's interesting because I gave a 15-minute talk at the Future of HR conference last month, titled "Cultural Transformation Through Social Technologies and Design Thinking." And it was all about building the right environment for people to succeed. And I started by talking about Agile Manifesto and how a group of brilliant engineers, architects, and software developers got together to find an alternative to the existing software delivery processes that they saw were complicated, slow, and unresponsive. This Agile Manifesto had laid the foundation for DevOps and all its flavors, like GitOps, DataOps, MLOps, etc. And it has 12 principles. And the first principle is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And here just shows the importance of really people and interactions over technology. And I also quoted a study by McKinsey and PwC. I think the PwC study found a 75% of change initiatives will fail, all due to a lack of digital culture. So when we talk about organizational culture, we talk about the collective behavior by people within the organization. But the interesting thing is, for organizations to understand and acknowledge that culture is vital to their strategy and achieving their goals, really organizations need to put people at the center. And then when you recognize that the business is people, not the product, not the process, then you start seeing the importance of culture. And there's a quote I'm trying to remember from I think Dr. Wayne Dyer, if I spell his name properly, and it says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I think it's true for culture. When you put people at the center, you start seeing that really culture is vital, it's important. Obviously here we talk about team structure, core values, interactions, decision making, management, etc. So if the culture is optimized for efficiency, but your digital strategy demands agility and adaptability, all you will get is efficiency. It's like talking to a friend the other day, and we were likening it to planting the seed of pumpkin and expecting watermelon, which I see organizations do all the time. So culture is vital to the success of digital transformation and beyond. Now, you mentioned on the second part of your question, I think the pandemic and its impacts. Obviously, the pandemic happened, fortunately, and it just proves that the world we live in is unpredictable, interconnected, and fast-paced. And the pandemic has had an impact on the workplace culture. The global lockdown and the travel bans have appended assumptions about the nature of work and corporate interactions. Organizations who are digitally matured and have culture that is conducive to agility could take advantage of the new reality, providing digital services, etc. You see impact on teams. Some teams are more productive because of the ability to work from home and because of the trust and autonomy that these teams enjoy. But on the other hand, I've seen more burnouts than ever because of the number of video calls people need to attend just to show they're there and that they are not slacking off. And it's not just interactions within organizations. Customers and organization interactions have also seen big change. Last year, I had to cancel my trip to Dubai, and I could cancel it. I can cancel my flight through a tweet, and I realized when I thought that organizations who empower their customer service to make timely decisions will definitely be able to shine as more customers move to social media, etc. So in the case of Japan, I think the pandemic exposed structural and digital deficiencies in organizations and government agencies. I think I don't know if you heard, it was reported that COVID cases numbers were actually faxed between agencies using fax machines. You can imagine human errors happen, and people overnight needed to work remotely. So one big service provider system went down because everyone was trying to log in remotely. It couldn't not scale and adapt. And on the other hand, nimble startups and businesses were more creative and innovative. So one of the focus in what we do in Aokumo is really helping organizations build a digital environment to improve employee experience and help customers build the digital culture needed in order to build adaptability and agility, and try not to be among the 70%, 75% that PwC study mentioned. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to kick off the episode and kind of set the tone and context for our further discussions, where we'll be going more in depth. And maybe I want to continue, since we already started talking about the uniqueness of Japanese culture and how Japanese companies had certain specifics with how they functioned during the crisis, how they operated throughout the pandemic. So in what other ways is Japanese culture unique, and how does that affect how companies do business?
Very, very good point. Well, I would put omoiyari at the top. Omoiyari means empathy. If you ever bought Japanese goods in a supermarket, for example, you would notice that the packaged product would come with a visual explanation, and you will be, easily know how to open it, stress-free. If you watched maybe the opening ceremony of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, you would see the presentation about the pictograms. New sports pictograms were added this year. And these pictograms were first created and introduced by Japan during the 1964 Olympics. This is an excellent example of omoiyari. So omoiyari is really everywhere in Japan, from product design, trains, and airports, announcements. In fact, my Japanese teacher once told me that she missed her plane when she was abroad because she was waiting for an announcement, which never happened. And I couldn't believe it until actually it happened to me, because you just get used to that, the ease which you get information here in Japan. So omoiyari is also part of how Japanese do businesses. Businesses expect their vendors or service providers to have omoyari, to not let them think much, to provide exceptional service. It is critical to consider what your Japanese customer is likely to need and proactively present it. The other thing is efficiency and quality. Japan is famous for taking a concept, honing it, and making it perfect. Japan has one of the most complex train network in the world, yet trains are always on time. Everything is built for efficiency. Japanese in general really demand quality in products and services. I think you probably have heard of the concept of monozukuri and kaizen, quite important. These concepts emphasize quality and continuous improvement. So Japanese are you probably know, Japanese are very proud of the phrase "made in Japan." Mm-hmm. So if we talk about organizational structure and culture, like in the context of organizational structure, then I can maybe talk about how Japan is, consensus-based culture. You may have heard of the concept of nemawashi, a consensus-building technique to reach decisions. It's a process, like it's informal, but it sometimes can be lengthy. And Japanese culture avoids confrontation. So you need to be careful how you give feedback, especially negative feedback. Trust is based on relationship, not how great your service is. So it's hard for new startups without a track record to penetrate markets. You see, on corporate websites, companies showcasing like whom they do business with, the certificates they have, and even which bank the company uses for its operations, just to show that they're legit. And another thing is Japanese culture is really what we call high context culture. Much communication goes on non-verbally through subtle gestures, facial expressions, and voice tones, and the goal is always group harmony. This is it's perfect for a homogeneous and well-established culture. But the moment you start mixing people from different cultures, miscommunications happen. I've seen this in projects, and the result was chaos. And I had to step in many times to ensure all parties understood what needed to be done, and who would do what and by when. Maybe a little bit more on this later. So the ability to read between the lines is really important. The last aspect I want to maybe mention is Japanese culture is hierarchy. Is based on hierarchy. Hierarchy is extremely important in Japanese corporate culture. The status in organization determines how members interact with each other and how they expect others to interact with them. So you need to pay attention to the hierarchy structure or hierarchical structure of the teams like customer teams or your service provider, and match it as closely as possible on your side. Say, for example, a Japanese vendor team has a senior manager and a middle-level manager, for example, and the junior staff. You need to match the Japanese vendor's team structure as close as possible. A rule that I broke many times, actually. I would sometimes just join even if teams had only juniors, just to get things done. And so these are some aspects showcasing the uniqueness in Japanese culture.
And maybe tying to your point about efficiency, didn't Japan actually kind of come up with a kind of precursor to agile methodologies?
Exactly, and that's Kaizen. I think that's the Kaizen, and that was the genesis. I wouldn't say genesis, but it was the foundation for the lean thinking, for the agile, for the continuous improvement, and absolutely right.
Yeah. That to me is a very fascinating part of the Japanese culture. This kind of this perfect balance of empathy, efficiency, and I would say a kind of, I'm not sure if politeness is the right word, but I think I mean politeness in kind of this moral sense of of compassion, and kind of, you mentioned, what was the expression you mentioned earlier? Common harmony or something like that.
Right. So there is a group harmony, and there is the omoyari, which is empathy, which is thinking about the other, and that's
You mentioned, like right now at the end, you mentioned vendors or service providers. So maybe can you tell us a little bit more about this, about the role that they play in all this, and maybe if there is a difference between, Japanese service providers working with Japanese companies and foreign service providers working with Japanese companies.
Right. So I think this is actually an important point. I think Japanese vendors and service providers, in my opinion, are one reason why Japan's digital agenda is still behind. Strong vendor dependency among Japanese business is part of it. Organizations tend to outsource their IT functions or part of it to vendors and system integrators. And obviously that comes at the price, heavy customization, heavy vendor lock, ownership. I've seen some contracts for which you need an army of lawyers to understand what is being provided, who owns what, and what is a SLA, etc. And also the lack of skills in organizations does not help. So organizations blindly trust their service providers. And so, they say you're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. And I really think a similar concept applies to organizations. Your vendors and service providers can make you or break you. I think an organization's agility and the success of its digital transformation are significantly impacted by its vendors' capabilities. I think you can be digital if your integrators or partners are not. You can't be nimble if you are dragged by the legacy and slowness of your suppliers and vendors and partners. So to be digital agile, I firmly believe that you need a network of modern partners who are agile, digital, and truly customer centric, truly invested in your success. And another reason is the risk averse nature of Japanese business prevent them from taking chances on small startups. This comes back to the trust we discussed earlier. There are many amazing startups and amazing products coming out of university labs. Japanese companies need to take a chance on these smart people. The language and cultural aspect that we discussed earlier are big barriers when it comes to foreign service providers. So at Aokumo, we work hard to be the modern digital partner Japanese business need. So one of our strengths is global reach and local impact. We believe that there should be a better way to engage with Japanese businesses through what we call co-sourcing and co-creation. And obviously, we're very happy to partner with global service providers to bring value to our Japanese customers. So,
have you been seeing any other major changes to Japanese culture apart from what we discussed early on in the call? And if so, how have these affected how Japanese businesses operate now versus how they operated maybe before the crisis?
Right. So I think the obvious one is working remotely. More people are moving to rural areas across Japan. New lifestyles emerge due to the pandemic. We see more companies migrating to the cloud and SaaS services. And I think that the realization that remote work is a key differentiator when hiring. Companies that are not remote work friendly are losing talent to startups that are embracing remote. And I think this is going to be a key factor in hiring going forward. Also, innovation in business models. Lately, you see the proliferation of shops without staff, and not just food, but also clothing, for example, where you enter a shop, you pick what you want, try, and pay through a QR code. And sometimes you just put money in the bin. I think only happens in Japan. Innovations in subscription-based products and services. I think there was a subscription-based providing diapers to kindergarten. So you see companies, innovate, which is great, but still a lot behind in terms of, infrastructure. And then, so I think remote is big. You see companies even going as far as selling their water, moving to small islands. This was unthinkable before. Still, many companies are still asking for people to come back to offices and go the other way, 100% office. So yeah, I think remote is a big change.
So in this sense, it's not actually that different from the cultures of, basically let's just call it what it is, the whole world, basically. Maybe another thing that I wanted to ask you is what are some of the main challenges that Japanese companies face because of these culture characteristics, and maybe how do they compare to the advantages that are caused by these characteristics?
Okay, so this going back to the aspect of the uniqueness of the culture, right? I think I would start from efficiency and quality. So, made in Japan embodies all the advantages of such unique culture, quality and efficiency. So, in an environment that demands efficiency, a Japanese team will excel. If it's clear what needs to be done and who should do what, you'll be amazed what people can do. But obviously, the world is anything but predictable. It demands speed, sometimes even at the expense of quality. I think Reid Hoffman said, "If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late." So, so the focus on quality sometimes get in the way. Nemawashi, which concept about decision making, brings is good in a way. It brings contextual awareness, which is good, but can be slow and may not necessarily reflect the changing environment. So people making decisions are not always, from the front lines. So this is another aspect that it can be good, but also disadvantage. So most organizations are structured to maximize efficiency through, siloed department and teams, and that creates frictions and slows things down. So you really want fast decision making, delivery, quick feedback loop, etc. Trust is another thing which can be both great and sometimes disadvantages. So as I mentioned earlier, is a relation based. So once big companies trust you by working with you, it becomes easier to do business, and that brings more customers, creates a virtuous cycle. But if you're not known, then it's hard. Communication, what we call kuki yomu, so that subtle, that reading between the line, is another thing. Communication within a homogeneous team, like just a team composed of Japanese, can be quick and very efficient. But it gets challenging when you start building culturally diverse teams, especially when you mix people with different communication styles. I read, you probably know, The Cultural Map by Erin Meyer, a great book that I recommend reading. And then you start understanding why. And I start asking actually people to read the book. Following the rule is another uniqueness. In Japan, people, as you know, follow the rules. Or in the case, like, for example, let's take mask wearing. It's actually, for mask wearing, it's a mix of omoyari and peer pressure. So, and I think the low COVID-19 infection rate is sometimes attributed to people wearing masks. People follow the unspoken wear mask rule. This is amazing when rules are clear, but when you have chaos, when things change rapidly and you need to adapt, following the rules or manuals can be counterproductive. And Aokumo, we were building a global and culturally diverse team born out of Tokyo. So we try to embrace many aspects of Japanese culture. As I mentioned earlier, omoyari is a huge one. Monozukuri concept, kaizen, the shingetai. I haven't spoken about shingetai. It's a concept used in martial arts like judo. It talks about the balance between the mind and the structure or body and technique or technology. So while ensuring that the teams have the contextual awareness and autonomy to navigate the uncertainty and even thrive in it, we're also helping our customers get accustomed to working in culturally diverse teams through workshops and tools like Obeya, something like the war room, where people from different teams come together to achieve certain outcome.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Maybe in this final bit of the episode, we focused mostly on theory. We barely dove into any practical examples. Maybe can we now dedicate a few minutes or a part of this episode to you telling us, or maybe giving us a few examples of what it's like to actually lead a Japanese team, and maybe share a particularly interesting case or challenge with us and our listeners.
This goes back to the cultural aspect we discussed earlier. Leading teams that speak the same language is hard enough, but when you throw in language barriers, cultural differences, different communication styles in the mix, boy, you need counseling from time to time. I can tell you. Luckily, my bosses were amazing and understanding. They would listen. So you need people to help put systems in place to make sure your information flows without miscommunication, without misunderstanding, without loss, and bring everyone under the same understanding, the same vision. Sometimes you may ask people to read the cultural map book that I mentioned earlier. Giving feedback is in the correct way that matches the cultural context is essential. You need to make everyone trust each other and know each other on a personal level. Read between the line culture. Also need to be careful about what you say and what you do. So you really need to walk the talk. I'll give some examples. Being an engineer, you sometimes get excited when you get a call. I was, the CTO, and so you get a call 2 a.m. in the morning, because of an outage, and you ask questions and you propose a fix, you get fixed, and feel good. You ask people to provide postmortem the next day and make sure that things never happen. And then one-on-one, you ask people to take ownership, to be owner. But on the other side, you're also asking them to call you whenever something goes wrong, and and this is what they would do. So they never learn to you ask them to take ownership, but then you don't create you don't explain first what the ownership means in such a context, and then you ask them you don't give them the opportunity and the chance to be ownership. This is so sometimes it's really you're sending mixed signals, and that's it can be not how I call it productive. So you need to balance between being hands-on and when to coach and mentor, and make sure you are growing self-motivated, self-sufficient, and self-accountable individuals and leaders, not followers. And also like how to strike the right balance between giving teams the flexibility to choose their tools and maintaining the required level of consistency and standardization. And this is where having a platform team is essential. When you get it right, you see a lot of success. When you get it wrong, you build the wrong thing, and you may still deliver, but half the team is burned out, and I've experienced that. But I can share maybe a positive example. One of our first cloud center of excellence team achieved enormous success because it was diverse enough to allow for creative thinking without the overhead of the lost in translation problem that we sometimes see in a culturally diverse team operating without culture map. So the team was autonomous and understood well the overall goals and the impact on the overall mission, and it was a great success.
I imagine that there's definitely some extra things that you need to consider, and obviously you have a lot of experience in that, since you worked in those settings for quite some time and led teams in those settings. Well, and I'm guessing that if anybody from the audience who's listening right now would like to learn more, maybe talk with you or learn more examples from you, they can reach out to you and find out more about you there. Where can they do that?
I'm on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Hairej, I think you just type Hairej Younes and you probably get my LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay, and in any case, I'll include the links to those in the show notes so that people viewing the episode can contact you right away.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you so much, Younes, for joining me today, for being our guest. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I hope our listeners enjoy the episode as well.
Thanks, Tim. My pleasure is all mine.
And to our listeners, that's all for this episode. Have a great day, everyone, and stay safe.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to check out our other episodes, you can find all of them at agiledrop.com/podcast, as well as on all the most popular podcasting platforms. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes, and don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and colleagues.